Hello, my name is Brian Kelly, and this is Xander J. Moore, and welcome to our podcast about AI tools, how they can be used for malicious intents, and how they might be able to be used for positive things, and how we can counteract these issues.
Yeah, so basically, the main tool we're talking about right now is ChatGPT, and it's basically a tool that you can use to answer basically any question you ask it, or you can basically ask it anything you want, and it will output some sort of response. The only restrictions it has are that it can't really output anything inappropriate, and it has a certain point in time where it can no longer answer after. So it only knows things up to like March of 2021.
Yeah, I think it also has a character limit because sometimes when I try to have it write things, it'll just stop mid-response, and I think it's because I'm asking it to write something longer than it can write.
That's probably true. And also it has a limited memory, so it can only remember so many things that you tell it.
It was a really good explanation.
Thank you. So, if we're just talking about things that it can do, it can literally write you paragraph. If you ask it to write you a paragraph about something, it will just write you a paragraph about something. So I asked it to write me a paragraph about the Cold War, and then it just gave me an entire paragraph about the Cold War.
It's also pretty good at like having an imagination. You can have it write about something that's not even real, and as long as you give it a little bit of a description, it can just go off of it. It's pretty good at just sticking with the details you give it.
Right. That also makes it so that if you have something that is after the time it knows, you can just generally explain it and then it will basically know it.
Yeah.
So obviously, since it has the ability to just generate paragraphs about topics, it's pretty easy to cheat with it, especially if you're writing like essays or if you just need a quick answer for something.
Yeah, I'd say academic dishonesty, while probably not the intent, is definitely the biggest, like, it's the thing it's used most often for, which is unfortunate. But it's just too easy to do anything with ChatGPT, honestly. At this point, almost all of the schoolwork that I have personally could be done with ChatGPT. And at this point, the teachers don't have enough tools to try to detect this stuff. So they just have to rely on honesty, which isn't enough for some kids.
Right. There are definitely ways to try to detect it, but there are very easy workarounds, like basically just rephrasing things. There are even like rephrase tools on the internet, I think, that you can use.
Yeah, I saw this one video. I haven't really tested this to see if it works, but what he claims is that if you get ChatGPT to write something, and then in a new conversation you paste that text into ChatGPT and say, "Did you write this?" According to the video, it's pretty good at telling it, telling the difference, and it can pretty much tell you whether or not it wrote it. But this guy said you can counteract it by putting it into a different AI that rewords things, and so then ChatGPT won't be able to detect it.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to work around.
But that's something like I never even thought about. Like the AI is so advanced that you can even use it to detect itself, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, it is pretty impressive. Um,
I really like messing around with ChatGPT and just seeing how far I can push it. And I've had it write entire, like we have our computer science classes, and I've had it write entire scripts that we've had for homework assignments in seconds. I still turn in my own work because, unlike most classes, computer science is one where I have to learn the material. So I still do it myself, but then afterwards I'll see if ChatGPT can do it and how differently it's doing it, how it's more efficient than what I've made. And it's honestly insane. But all I have to do is give it a quick description of what I want, and then it just goes with it. And if it does something wrong, I can just say, "Hey, I forgot to include this detail. Can you remake it, but with this detail being considered?" And it'll make something near identical, but with the fix you added.
right, yeah, I forgot to mention that it's really good at taking in your input. Like you can tell it that doesn't make sense, and then it'll go back and realize what it did wrong, and then it just gives you a better answer.
There are limits though. Like sometimes I was trying to have it write code in a game engine just to test it out. and it asked me to do something within the engine that's not a thing you can do. And I was like, "Hey, that thing doesn't exist." And it was like, "Oh, yeah, my bad. No, you're right. Do this instead." And that also didn't work. And then when I pointed that out, it just asked me to go back to the first thing. But then if I pointed it out again, it'd go back to the second thing. And it was this constant loop of it trying to get me to do something that I physically could not do. So it's still not perfect. There are limits, but it's surprising how well it does work sometimes.
Right. But on the topic of game development, I was working on a game earlier today, and I asked ChatGPT if it could help me write some platformer movement code, and it worked like perfectly. I just had to tell it that it needs to like expire when it touches the ground and stuff like that, and it worked so well.
Yeah, with
It's
relatively simple stuff, it's really good. The problem is that if you get it to write really complex stuff, it's either just not quite there yet and it'll have a bunch of errors, or, I was talking about the character limit. I haven't seen on the website that there is a character limit, but almost every time I've had it write code that's a little complex, it will just stop mid script. And I think because the code is too long, so I'll have to have it like write it in different sections so that I can get it all complete.
right. So we've
And
talked a lot of.
that's sorry, what were you saying?
No, you keep going.
I was just saying that's implying that the code even works in the first place.
Right. So we've talked a lot about like what ChatGPT can do, but we need like if this is going to be a debate, then there needs to be a solution, right? Like how can we
Yeah.
stop this from being such a prevalent issue with academic dishonesty? I read
I
one thing by some school librarians, and it was called the ChatGPT Revolution, and it said, "What can school librarians do with ChatGPT?" They went to the source and asked the chatbot, "How can school librarians use ChatGPT?" And with that idea in mind, I actually asked ChatGPT itself, "How can I prevent my students from using ChatGPT to cheat on assignments?" And it had some pretty interesting things to say. At first, usually when you ask it to do something, if it can't do it or if it doesn't understand it completely, it'll say something about it being an AI language model. Sometimes it'll tell you that it can't have opinions and stuff like that, like some restrictions it has. And so it basically explained that like it can't dictate what it gets used for. So like it can't tell students not to use it for that because it can't really tell if you're asking it for like schoolwork. You know what I mean?
That's really interesting. I asked it um what we could do to, make it harder for students to use ChatGPT to cheat. Not necessarily like how to catch them in the act, but more just how can we adjust schooling as a whole. And it basically it had a lot of them, but it was really just the same three things being repeated. One of them, it was just like, um, tell them not to do that. And, I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm sure teachers haven't thought of that. But
Yeah, I had that too. It was like, what did it say specifically? I have it. It said clearly communicate your expectations and policies on academic integrity, which is like, it's a good solution on paper, but how many students who are using ChatGPT are going to stop if you tell them to stop?
yeah, no, exactly. That's one of the problems with ChatGPT. But one thing to also note is that we're using 3.5 because like version 3.5 because it's
Right.
free. But version 4 is out and it's way better. There's so much more you can do with it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it has way more up-to-date knowledge and just more memory, and it's faster loading.
Yeah. The other two solutions it said was use programs online that detect ChatGPT, but like we said, that doesn't really work that well. Um, In fact, there are a lot of websites out there that claim they can detect ChatGPT. So I did a little test. I've written a few research papers for college classes over the years. So what I did was I would paste my thesis into ChatGPT, and I would say write a research paper based off this thesis. It would write the paper. I would paste my paper in one tab. Then I would make a new tab with the same website, but ChatGPT's paper. And there were several times where it said that ChatGPT's was more human than mine, which is scary to me that a teacher might rely on these websites and then, think that a student has been cheating when they're not, because I once had it say that ChatGPT's was like 98% human, and I once had it saying mine was 2% human. And I tested this with a bunch of different websites. Some of them seem more reliable than others, but it just depends on what text you put in. Because like one website would be pretty accurate for one research paper, but then not accurate at all for another research paper. So it's just really hard to tell with these things.
Right, yeah, that's a super scary, like, it says that that's a solution, but it's just not a good enough solution because there aren't tools that can tell for 100% certain. So you always have to have that little bit of distrust in the solution.
Exactly.
And you said you had
But
one other solution?
yeah, and this is the solution that I was thinking that I think is really the only one we have at this point. Um, we just need to adjust the school system. I think a problem that's been a problem even before this ChatGPT stuff is that the school system seems outdated. So much of it is based on like memorization, which is obsolete now due to our technology. You know, I remember teachers in elementary school saying, "You won't have a calculator with you in the grocery store," but we do, right? Um, my history teacher, Mr. Dees, he was saying that he is adjusting the way he does his class because memorization doesn't make any sense. He said if the school wants you to memorize all of the presidents, there's no point in doing that because even if you did need to know what the presidents were, you could just look it up in a second, figure out exactly which president was the 13th president and all that. So, like, my history teacher's been completely changing the way he does schoolwork. He doesn't give us assignments, he doesn't give us tests. He gives us lectures, teaches us about the values of history and, why things happened and what we can learn from them, and then makes us give presentations on them. And sure, I can get ChatGPT to write the, presentation, but that's not the point. The point is that he's teaching us like actual, life skills based upon history and not just having us memorize facts of things that happened.
Right, yeah. Those were the same three solutions that it gave me. And the way that it said it was design assignments that require critical thinking and analysis. Create assignments that are based on higher order thinking skills such as analysis and evaluation, which I think is really the only way to do it because if you're having like assignments that you can literally answer with one question chat typed into an AI, then they're probably not engaging enough to actually make a difference in a student's mind. There definitely are things that you need to just memorize, but I think a lot of the time that's the only way that you're going to be able to get away from this issue.
Yeah. That I mean, yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I think just the only way we're gonna really solve the AI issue, especially if it's just gonna get worse and worse from here on out, is we just need to change the school system. And I think we've needed to change the school system for a bit, like I said, just because of modern technology. But now this ChatGPT thing really gives us a reason to do that.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's really the biggest solution and the biggest problem.
But, I mean, that is easier said than done. I understand that we've had the school system for who knows how long, so it's hard to just say, "Oh, here's how I'm gonna make it different," right? My history teacher's solution works for, like, history, but, like, science would be a lot different, right? And so, it's not gonna be easy to make these changes, but I just think they're necessary, and that it's just something we need to be thinking about for the future.
Yeah, like you were saying, I think science is probably one of the biggest ones because science is all just things that you need to memorize pretty much in my eyes. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like there are things like English where you can have more complex assignments, but things like science or chemistry, for example, is a lot of like periodic table and you need to know that stuff. So there's
Yeah,
no
no, I
real way
mean,
to.
there's a reason the school system has been the way it is for so long. It's because in some ways, it works, right? It's really good. There's a way to teach science, there's a way to teach math, all that stuff. There's a reason it's been the same for so long. And I don't think we need to completely redo everything, but I just think adjustments need to be made. What adjustments those are, I don't know. I really don't, and I wish I did, but I'm sure it's something we can figure out in the future.
Yeah.
So I wanted a teacher perspective on all of this. So I interviewed the computer science English teacher, Miss Gray, and here's what she had to say. So I asked her the question, "What is ChatGPT?" And her words exactly was, "It is an artificial intelligence used for cheating on school." And so that was interesting because I've heard people like, talk about ChatGPT, but I've never heard anybody just say it's an AI for cheating, right? And so I said, "Do you think that was the intended purpose?" And she said that she doesn't really know because she's never seen an AI tool like that used for anything other than cheating, which I think is totally valid. That's one of the things. Like the reason ChatGPT is so popular is because of all the news and things about how it could be used for cheating and all this academic dishonesty stuff. And I'm sure she's experienced all of that in her classroom. Um, whether she even knew it or not. Um, so I think that's interesting that some people don't even realize that there's other potential for it other than just cheating. But I think it's a valid thing, just because that's what it's, most commonly known for.
Right. I definitely think that that's the biggest application, but there are totally like other ways to use it. Not that you're saying the opposite, but
Yeah.
like like I said, I've used it for help with making my game. It's kind of like Google where you can just type anything you need to know into it and then it can give you an answer, but it can give it to you as an answer instead of as an article.
Yeah, no, so that's what I've been using it for, right? My grandmother, she's not very good with technology and stuff like that. So she's always asking me questions on how she can do things on her computer. I introduced her to the Bing AI. Bing released an AI built into the web browser that's very similar to ChatGPT. So I introduced her to that, showed her how to use that, said, anytime you want to ask me a question, ask this instead. And the thing that she really likes about it, right? She will get an explanation for something. And if it's too complicated, she can say, dumb it down, or like explain it to me like I'm five, right? And it will do it. It'll make it simpler for her. If she has follow up questions, right? She can ask the follow up questions and get more context on something. And in many ways, it's a teacher, right? Like it can teach things. I was curious to see if it could do my math homework for me, right? So I put, because like when kids cheat on schoolwork on math, it's just like finding answers, but word problems can be tough, right? Because there's not just like an equation you can type in. But I gave the word problem to ChatGPT, and not only did it solve the word problem correctly, but it showed me step by step what it did to get the answer in its simple way. And that's one thing that I was feeling is like ChatGPT not only can be used from a student's point, but it can be the teacher, right? So like I asked Miss Gray, if she felt that her job was threatened by ChatGPT, and she said absolutely not. And I found that interesting. I should have asked follow-up questions because I'm curious why she didn't think so, but I hadn't done that at the time.
Right. That's one thing that I've seen a lot is people saying that like ChatGPT could almost be used as an educational tool. Like they could have it implemented into the curriculum. If you need if you're not understanding a problem in a test, you don't need to ask the teacher, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" You can ask ChatGPT, "Hey, I don't understand this problem. Can you walk me through it?"
Yeah, it's insane just like how big the use cases are. I'm sure there's plenty of things that it would be really good at that we haven't even thought about. It's honestly insane. But I think the big thing here is how are we going to solve these problems, right? So I said, I asked her how we can stop academic dishonesty using AI tools, and her verbatim sentence was, "They are working on a program." And I guess like I know the websites exist. I know GPT Zero is being developed, which is supposed to be a program that can detect it really well, but I don't know how well that's going to work. And so I said, "What do you know about the program?" And she said, "I have no clue." Um, so I think the main thing I wanted to ask her, right, because these tools might be inaccurate, I said, "Would you 100% have faith in the program if it said that a student was cheating?" And she said no, which I think is good. I think it's good that teachers need to, at least understand the possibility that the AI could be wrong because I think too many people nowadays just have too much trust in technology. But like I said when I did the testing, it's just not perfect.
Right. So that's ChatGPT and how it affects the school system and how we can move forward.